The dark story of Solomon's reign was one of prosperity and peace. But what went so wrong? Behind his legendary wisdom lies a tale of temptation, betrayal, and a kingdom on the brink of ruin. If you think Solomon's story ends in glory, think again. Watch till the end to uncover the choices that led to his downfall, and the lessons still echoing today. Chapter 1. The Rise of Solomon, a prosperous king. Solomon's rise to the throne of Israel marked the beginning of a golden age for the nation, a period defined by unprecedented peace, prosperity, and power. As the son of the legendary King David, Solomon had enormous shoes to fill. David was a revered leader, not just for his military conquests, but for his deep relationship with God. Solomon, however, was destined to lead in a way that was vastly different from his father. Instead of being a warrior king, Solomon was known for his intellect, diplomacy, and extraordinary wealth. Solomon's early reign was filled with wisdom and discernment, which became his hallmark. His leadership began with a monumental request to God. As a young king, he could have asked for anything: military power, long life, or great wealth. Yet, in one of the most famous stories in the Bible, Solomon asked God for wisdom to rule his people with justice. God was so pleased with this selfless request that he not only granted Solomon unparalleled wisdom, but also blessed him with immense wealth and honor. From that moment, Solomon's wisdom became legendary. It drew visitors from far and wide, including rulers and dignitaries, all of whom marveled at his intellect and judgments. His reign was not marked by war, but by peace, something unusual for kings of that era. Through strategic alliances, especially his marriage to the daughter of the Pharaoh of Egypt, Solomon ensured that Israel had no major military conflicts during his time. The result was a flourishing economy. Solomon established trade routes that brought gold, spices, and other riches into Israel. It is said that during his reign, silver was as common as stones in Jerusalem. His diplomatic acumen ensured that Israel became a hub for international trade, and the wealth of the nation soared. One of Solomon's most enduring legacies is the construction of the first temple in Jerusalem. This was more than just a religious building. It was the center of Israel's faith, the place where the Ark of the Covenant resided, and a symbol of their unique relationship with God. The temple became a place of pilgrimage and a demonstration of Solomon's wealth and devotion to God. However, as we will see, even a king as wise and blessed as Solomon was not immune to the temptations and challenges of leadership. His reign, while prosperous, laid the groundwork for some of the issues that would later divide the kingdom. Yet in the early years of his rule, Solomon's reign represented the pinnacle of Israel's success, and his wisdom was unmatched, earning him a place among the greatest rulers in history. Chapter 2. The Early Life of Solomon, a Turbulent Beginning. Though Solomon's reign would be remembered for peace and prosperity, his early life was filled with tension and political intrigue. He was born to David and Bathsheba, a relationship that itself was steeped in controversy. Bathsheba had been the wife of Uriah, a loyal soldier whom David had sent to die in battle after an affair with her. The circumstances of Solomon's birth were far from ideal, casting a shadow over his early years. However, this would not be the defining aspect of his life, as he would go on to fulfill a destiny that God had ordained. Growing up in the royal court was no simple task. King David, Solomon's father, had many wives and children, which inevitably led to rivalries, conflicts, and power struggles. Solomon, despite being younger than many of David's other sons, was favored by both David and God. This favoritism bred resentment among his older siblings, who had their own ambitions for the throne. The most notable of these rivalries was with Absalom, David's third son. Absalom had already attempted to overthrow his father in a bloody rebellion, but his efforts were in vain, and he was eventually killed. Later, as David's health began to fail, another of Solomon's half-brothers, Adonijah, made his move. Adonijah declared himself king, gathering support from influential figures such as Joab, David's general, and Abiathar, the priest. Adonijah's coup was almost successful, and had it not been for the intervention of Nathan the prophet and Bathsheba, Solomon might never have taken the throne. Bathsheba, along with Nathan, reminded David of his promise that Solomon would be his successor. In his weakened state, David reaffirmed this promise and took swift action to ensure Solomon's coronation. Solomon was anointed king by Zadok the priest, and thus began his reign, not through smooth succession, but through a near civil war within his family. This early power struggle shaped Solomon's approach to leadership. One of his first acts as king was to eliminate any potential threats to his rule. Adonijah, despite being spared initially, continued to scheme and was eventually executed. Joab, who had sided with Adonijah, was also put to death. Solomon's reign was thus secured through a mixture of wisdom and ruthlessness, a theme that would continue throughout his life. These early years were fraught with danger and internal conflict, but they also prepared Solomon for the complexities of leadership. Having navigated the treacherous waters of royal politics, Solomon emerged as a strong and capable ruler, ready to lead Israel into its most prosperous era. Yet, the seeds of future discord had already been sown in the turmoil of his early life, and they would eventually bear fruit in the later years of his reign. Chapter 3: Solomon's Ascension to the Throne. Solomon's path to the throne was not a peaceful transition, but one filled with political maneuvering and personal betrayal. As the youngest son of King David, Solomon's right to the throne was not uncontested. His half-brother Adonijah, emboldened by David's weakening health, made a bold move to usurp the throne before David could officially name his successor. Adonijah's claim to the throne was supported by key figures in David's kingdom, including Joab, David's trusted military commander, and Abiathar, one of the high priests. Adonijah's strategy was calculated and ambitious. He organized a grand coronation ceremony for himself, inviting key leaders and officials who would bolster his claim to the throne. However, his exclusion of Solomon and other key loyalists, including Nathan the prophet and Bathsheba, Solomon's mother, was a crucial misstep. Upon learning of Adonijah's actions, Bathsheba and Nathan quickly intervened, reminding the frail David of his promise to anoint Solomon as the next king. In a dramatic turn of events, David ordered that Solomon be crowned immediately. With the support of the prophet Nathan, Zadok the priest, and Benaiah, the commander of David's personal guard, Solomon was anointed as king in a public ceremony that solidified his legitimacy. The sound of the people rejoicing and the trumpet's blast echoed through the city, drowning out Adonijah's ill-fated coronation and sending a clear message. Solomon was now the chosen king of Israel. However, Solomon's ascension to the throne was just the beginning of his political challenges. In a bid to consolidate his power, he swiftly dealt with his opponents. Adonijah, despite being initially spared, continued to pose a threat by requesting to marry Abishag, a woman who had served King David. This request was seen as an attempt to solidify his claim to the throne, and Solomon acted decisively. Adonijah was executed along with Joab, who had also betrayed Solomon by supporting Adonijah's rebellion. Solomon's swift and decisive actions were not driven by cruelty, but by necessity. His kingdom could not stand divided, and any remaining threat to his rule needed to be neutralized. By consolidating power early in his reign, Solomon ensured stability within Israel, allowing him to focus on governance and the monumental task of building the temple, fulfilling his father's vision for a permanent place of worship for the people of Israel. This consolidation of power was a turning point for Solomon's reign. Having eliminated his internal enemies, he could now turn his attention to uniting the nation and implementing the plans that would make Israel the most powerful and prosperous kingdom of its time. His reign would be marked by peace and prosperity, But these early days served as a stark reminder that even a king chosen by God must navigate the perilous waters of political intrigue. Chapter 4. The Transformation of Israel Governance and Administration. Once Solomon had secured his throne, he set about transforming Israel into a well-organized and prosperous nation. Unlike his father David, who had unified Israel through military conquest, Solomon's focus was on internal governance, administration, and trade. His goal was to create a lasting legacy that would make Israel not just powerful, but a beacon of prosperity and stability in the ancient world. One of Solomon's first acts was to reform the administrative divisions of Israel. He divided the nation into 12 districts, each responsible for supplying provisions to the royal court for 1 month of the year. This system ensured that the needs of the kingdom were met consistently without overburdening any one region. The efficiency of this system allowed Solomon's court to thrive, with daily provisions that were staggering in their volume. According to the biblical account, the royal court's daily consumption included 9,000 kilos of flour, 30 cattle, and 100 sheep and goats, among other delicacies. This immense provision reflected the prosperity of the kingdom and the vast size of Solomon's court. Solomon's governance extended beyond mere administration. He had a vision for Israel that involved elevating its infrastructure and its cultural standing. He commissioned the construction of new roads and fortifications, ensuring that Israel was well connected and protected from external threats. One of his most significant projects was the construction of the first temple in Jerusalem, a massive undertaking that would serve as the religious and cultural heart of the nation. Solomon's administrative reforms also extended to the military. While his reign was marked by peace, Solomon understood the importance of a strong defense. He introduced chariots and cavalry into the Israelite army, significantly enhancing its capabilities. These military innovations allowed Israel to protect its trade routes and maintain peace throughout the region. Trade became one of the hallmarks of Solomon's reign. With Israel's strategic location between major empires, Solomon capitalized on its position by controlling key trade routes. He established trade agreements with neighboring nations, including a lucrative deal with Hiram, the king of Tyre. This partnership allowed Solomon to acquire the materials necessary for his many building projects, including the temple, in exchange for large quantities of wheat and olive oil. Solomon also traded horses and chariots with Egypt and other neighboring nations, further enhancing Israel's economic standing. Under Solomon's leadership, Israel became a hub of international trade. His fleets sailed the Red Sea, reaching as far as Ophir, a region rich in gold and other valuable resources. This maritime trade brought immense wealth to the kingdom, and it was said that during Solomon's reign, silver became as common as stones in the streets of Jerusalem. This prosperity allowed Solomon to live in splendor, but more importantly, it elevated the status of Israel in the eyes of the world. Solomon's reign was defined by his ability to balance domestic governance with international diplomacy. His reforms transformed Israel from a tribal society into a well-organized and prosperous kingdom, capable of competing on the international stage. However, the prosperity that marked his reign also sowed the seeds of discontent, as we will see in later chapters. Chapter 5. Solomon's military and economic successes. Solomon's reign was not just marked by wisdom and administrative reforms, but also by significant advancements in military and economic strategies. Despite his reputation as a king of peace, Solomon understood the importance of maintaining a strong military presence to protect Israel's borders and trade routes. His approach to warfare was not based on expansion through conquest, as his father David's had been, but rather on defense and strategic alliances. One of Solomon's most notable military innovations was the introduction of chariots and cavalry into the Israelite army. These additions significantly improved the mobility and effectiveness of Israel's forces. particularly in defending key trade routes and fortifying the nation's borders. Solomon built numerous fortresses along Israel's frontiers, ensuring that any potential threats from neighboring kingdoms could be repelled swiftly. These military developments allowed Solomon to focus on diplomacy and trade rather than constant warfare, securing Israel's place as a regional power. However, Solomon's true genius lay in his economic policies. His reign saw the establishment of trade networks that brought unparalleled wealth into Israel. Solomon controlled several key trade routes that connected major empires, such as Egypt, Assyria, and Babylon. By positioning Israel as a central hub for commerce, Solomon ensured that his kingdom prospered. One of the most significant trade agreements Solomon made was with Hiram, the king of Tyre. This partnership provided Solomon with the materials he needed for his many construction projects, particularly the first temple. In exchange, Solomon supplied Hiram with vast quantities of wheat and olive oil, cementing a mutually beneficial relationship between the two kingdoms. Solomon's economic policies extended beyond land-based trade. He was also a pioneer in maritime trade. Solomon's fleets sailed the Red Sea and the Arabian Sea, reaching distant lands such as Ophir, a region known for its gold. These voyages, which could take up to 3 years to complete, brought back immense wealth, including gold, silver, ivory, and exotic animals. This maritime trade not only enriched the kingdom, but also established Israel's reputation as a prosperous and powerful nation. One of the most striking aspects of Solomon's economic success was the sheer scale of wealth that flowed into Israel. The Bible recounts that silver became as common as stones in Jerusalem, a testament to the immense prosperity that Solomon's trade policies brought to the kingdom. The king's wealth was not only reflected in the grandeur of his court, but also in the many public works projects he undertook. Solomon's construction of new roads, fortifications, and buildings transformed Israel into a modern, thriving kingdom. Solomon's diplomatic skills were equally impressive. He forged alliances with neighboring nations, ensuring peace and stability throughout his reign. His marriage to the daughter of the Pharaoh of Egypt was a strategic move that secured a crucial alliance with one of the most powerful empires of the time. These alliances allowed Solomon to focus on internal development and trade, rather than being bogged down by constant military threats. Despite the prosperity that Solomon's military and economic policies brought to Israel, they also came at a cost. The heavy taxes and forced labor required to maintain such a vast and prosperous kingdom would eventually lead to discontent among the people. While Solomon's reign was one of peace and prosperity, the seeds of unrest were quietly being sown, and the consequences of his policies would become apparent after his death. Chapter 6. The construction of the first temple. The crowning achievement of Solomon's reign was undoubtedly the construction of the first temple in Jerusalem. This magnificent structure was not just a symbol of Solomon's wealth and power, but also a testament to Israel's deep relationship with God. The first temple was the fulfillment of a promise God had made to David, that his son would build a house for the Lord. For Solomon, this was not just a personal ambition, it was a divine mission. The temple was constructed on Mount Moriah, a site of great spiritual significance. According to tradition, this was the place where Abraham had been prepared to sacrifice his son Isaac, and where David had built an altar to the Lord. Solomon's decision to build the temple here was deeply symbolic, linking Israel's present with its sacred past. Construction of the temple began in the 4th year of Solomon's reign and took 7 years to complete. The building was an immense undertaking, requiring a vast workforce and the finest materials. Solomon's alliance with Hiram, the king of Tyre, proved crucial, as Hiram supplied the cedar wood and skilled laborers needed for the construction. In addition to the workforce from Tyre, Solomon conscripted laborers from among the Canaanite peoples who had been subjugated by Israel. This forced labor, while efficient, was unpopular among the Israelites and would later contribute to tensions within the kingdom. The temple itself was a marvel of architecture and artistry. Though modest in size by today's standards, it was built with the most valuable materials available at the time. The interior was adorned with gold, and the walls were lined with cedar and fine stone. The Holy of Holies, the innermost chamber of the temple, was the most sacred part of the structure, designed to house the Ark of the Covenant. Only the high priest was allowed to enter this chamber, and only once a year, on Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. When the temple was finally completed in the 11th year of Solomon's reign, Solomon organized a grand dedication ceremony. Thousands of Israelites gathered to witness the event, and countless sacrifices were made in honor of the Lord. The dedication of the temple was a moment of immense national pride, and it marked the pinnacle of Solomon's reign. The temple would serve as the center of Israel's religious life for centuries to come. The significance of the temple cannot be overstated. For the people of Israel, it was not just a building, it was the dwelling place of God on earth. The Ark of the Covenant, which represented God's presence, was placed in the Holy of Holies, signifying that God was with his people. The temple also became a focal point for worship, pilgrimage, and national identity. It was a symbol of Israel's covenant with God, a reminder of their special status as his chosen people. However, the construction of the temple also came with its challenges. The forced labor required to build the temple, along with the heavy taxes imposed to fund its construction, caused discontent among the Israelites. While the temple was a symbol of national pride, it also represented the growing burden that Solomon's reign placed on the people. This tension would only grow in the years to come as Solomon's ambitious building projects continued. The first temple was not just a physical structure, it was the heart of Israel's spiritual life. It represented the fulfillment of God's promise to David and the culmination of Solomon's wisdom, wealth, and devotion. Yet even as the temple stood as a symbol of Israel's glory, the cracks in Solomon's reign were beginning to show, and the peace and prosperity that had defined his rule would not last forever. Chapter 7, Solomon's Wisdom, a Gift from God. Solomon's wisdom is perhaps the most defining aspect of his reign, and it is what sets him apart from other rulers in the Bible. His wisdom was not just an innate talent, but a divine gift, bestowed upon him by God in a moment of profound humility. The story of how Solomon received his wisdom is one of the most famous in the Bible and reveals the depth of his character. Early in his reign, Solomon had a dream in which God appeared to him and offered him anything he desired. This was a pivotal moment for the young king. Solomon could have asked for wealth, power, or a long life, things that most rulers would have coveted. However, Solomon's request was different. He asked God for wisdom, specifically an understanding heart, so that he could govern his people with justice and discernment. God was so pleased with Solomon's selfless request that he granted him not only wisdom, but also wealth and honor beyond measure. From that moment on, Solomon's wisdom became legendary. It was said that he was wiser than all the men of the East and all the wisdom of Egypt, two of the most renowned centers of learning in the ancient world. His